My name is Liana. I'm 31 years old, and I spent 5 years building a scientific breakthrough, only for my boss to put his name on it and call me crazy when I spoke up. He told the world I was unstable, ungrateful, just a junior researcher who didn't understand how things worked. But I remember the night we cracked the final algorithm. I saw the way he looked at me. He knew it was mine. And he knew no one would believe me if he took it. He was right. They didn't. My name wasn't on the patent, not on the paper, not in the press. I watched it all from a temp job break room while he smiled on national TV. They thought I'd disappear, but I didn't. If you've ever been silenced while someone else stole your voice, stay here, like, and subscribe. Because this is the story of how I took it back, piece by piece. He published my invention under his name, then told the world I was delusional, that I was some overambitious junior researcher who couldn't handle rejection. He called me ungrateful, unstable, said I was lucky to have ever been in his lab. But I remember the night we cracked the final algorithm, the way he looked at me like he knew it wasn't his, but also knew no one would believe me if he took it. And he was right, they didn't. The day the patent was announced, my name was nowhere. The blueprint I'd drawn by hand, the simulations I'd run night after night, the core framework only I understood. It was all there, in his voice, his press photos, his carefully tailored suit, standing in front of my life's work. I only knew because I was watching the broadcast from the break room of a temp job I'd taken just to keep the lights on. No one returned my calls. Colleagues who once called me brilliant suddenly avoided eye contact. When I tried to speak up, they said I was bitter, said I was lucky he didn't sue me for defamation. And just like that, I became a ghost in the very halls I once dreamed of walking as a leader. They closed the door on my career before it even started, and all the while, he smiled, as if this had been the plan from the beginning. I was supposed to disappear. That was the unspoken sentence. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something inside me refused to go silent. I stopped chasing justice in their courts and started studying something else entirely. Silence. Yes, but not surrender. Calculation. Precision. Patience. Because the man who erased me with a signature didn't realize. I was still here, watching, learning, waiting. And what he didn't see, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the very science he used to bury me would one day become the tool I'd use to bury him. But I wasn't finished. I was just getting started. If someone took everything you built and told the world you were the problem, what would you do next? Stay silent or fight back? Stick around because what happened next changed everything. The committee dismissed my petition without hesitation. No inquiry, no hearing. Just a curt email that said my allegations lacked substantial merit. Within 24 hours, my university credentials were revoked. My login failed. My lab pass buzzed red. My access to the very room I'd helped build, gone. I stood outside that glass door, scanning my badge again and again, like a fool refusing to accept the silence. No explanation, no apology. Just the whimper of an automated lock telling me I no longer belonged. I tried to speak to my colleagues, people I once shared midnight experiments and cafeteria coffee with. They averted their eyes in the hallway. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Some even changed their seats during faculty meetings, as if I were contagious. One of them, someone I once mentored, murmured that Professor Whitaker said I'd mishandled sensitive data, that I'd cost the lab a major funding opportunity, that my erratic behavior was endangering the integrity of the entire department. I called every contact I had, every former supervisor, every distant acquaintance in the field. Nothing. No callbacks, no references, just polite rejections, or worse, silence. I submitted resume after resume, paper after paper. Weeks passed, then months. My inbox remained a desert. One hiring manager finally responded, but only to say I had been flagged as a professional risk, that my name was quietly circulating on an unofficial watch list in academic circles. I had been labeled unstable, difficult, ethically compromised. I heard someone whisper once in the break room, "She used to work with Whitaker, right? Didn't she accuse him of something?" They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't have to. Their faces said enough. They'd already decided who I was. And I wasn't a scientist anymore. I was a warning label, a cautionary tale. They dropped me from the team and never looked back. Up to this point, it seemed like the story of a genius crushed by power. But here's where it turns. Have you ever seen a phoenix rise from its ashes? With a blueprint? I moved back home with nothing but a duffel bag and a hard drive. The university wouldn't take me. No lab would return my emails. I slept in the garage behind my mother's house. Its cement floor still etched with oil stains from my father's tools long gone. The air smelled of rust and pine cleaner. There was a cot, a folding table, and my laptop. That was it. But inside that hard drive were the original schematics, the raw files, the birth of everything he'd taken from me. That night, while he was on stage in Stockholm, accepting the Nobel Prize for his contribution to applied systems engineering, I sat in the dark with the blue glow of the monitor lighting my face. I watched the live stream on mute. I watched him smile, watched the crowd rise to its feet. And then I opened the folder named First Draft, the one with my initials on every file name. That's when I saw it, a line of logic in his published paper that didn't align with the original. It was small, elegant in its deception, but wrong. A leap made without structural proof. He had patched over an unknown using a shortcut, a mathematical assumption that only someone fluent in the source code would catch. But I caught it, and when I traced that flaw back into his previous work, into the bedrock of his so-called revolutionary theory, I realized something chilling. If this one crack was real, the entire structure would collapse under its own arrogance. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Not from memory, from understanding. This time, I would rebuild the theory from the ground up. Not for recognition, not for applause, but for truth. Clean, undeniable, authored, encrypted, time-stamped. This time, no one would be able to steal it, because it wouldn't just be science. It would be a weapon, one he'd taught me how to aim. I wasn't confused, I wasn't delusional, and I damn sure wasn't done. What if I told you that one anonymous paper, just one, could shake the ground beneath a giant's feet? You won't believe how fast the tide began to turn. I didn't need a podium or a press release. I just needed a quiet upload and the right set of eyes. From that dusty garage in the suburbs, I submitted my first draft to an encrypted peer review forum. The kind that didn't ask for names, only ideas. The paper didn't scream rebellion. It whispered something far more dangerous. A new mathematical framework that questioned the stability of the so-called Whitaker principle. I didn't mention him directly. I didn't need to. Anyone fluent in the language of systems theory would see it for what it was. A scalpel aimed at the jugular of his legacy. By morning, the ripple had started. A professor from Berlin wrote, "If this is correct, Whitaker's entire model needs reevaluation." By evening, a thread had formed, physicists in Geneva, data scientists in Montreal, a theorist in Tokyo, all poking at the flaw, like surgeons around a tumor, marveling that it had gone unnoticed for so long. My inbox, an account under a pseudonym I hadn't used since grad school, buzzed with cautious curiosity. Not celebration. Not yet. Just the kind of quiet panic that spreads when a sacred idea begins to look mortal. And then, inevitably, he noticed. A week after the paper gained traction, he tweeted, "Amusing how anonymous amateurs think they can dismantle Nobel-winning theory. Desperation wears a predictable mask." Thousands liked it. Academics rushed to defend him. But he didn't know, had no way of knowing, that the anonymous amateur was the same person he'd once called his brightest pupil, the same person he'd tried to erase. I saw the tweet and smiled, not because it hurt, but because he still thought this was about recognition, about resentment. No, this wasn't a tantrum. This was a reckoning. and I hadn't signed my name yet. So far, it was all whispers in the dark. But what happens when truth walks into the spotlight? Stay with me, because the moment he stumbled, the world was watching. The auditorium was filled with polished shoes, starched collars, and the low hum of intellectual anticipation. It was the International Symposium on Systems Control, and Everett Whitaker stood at the center like a conductor preparing to unveil his latest symphony. Behind him, the screen glowed with diagrams and equations. He was expanding on what he claimed as his defining achievement, a real-time adaptive feedback model hailed as a cornerstone of modern control theory. His voice, slick and sure, echoed through the hall with practiced gravitas. He paced slowly, gesturing to equations he hadn't derived, theories he hadn't birthed. And then it happened. A hand rose from the second row. The room stilled. A professor from ETH Zurich, stern, precise, with a reputation for devouring flawed logic, stood and cleared his throat. "Professor Whitaker," he said evenly, "could you clarify the microvariance deviation in the control integration segment? According to the paper recently published in Contemporary Systems Theory, the output oscillations in your 2012 framework would produce phase delays incompatible with your current model." There was a pause. A long one. Everett blinked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The calm rhythm of his voice broke. That particular segment, I believe there might be perhaps, the simulations." He turned toward the screen, clicking to the next slide. But the projection didn't help him. It betrayed him. It was the exact visual I had created, the one that exposed the mathematical contradiction at the heart of his so-called paradigm, rendered cleanly, elegantly, lethally. The equations spun beside the animated model, each one building toward a conclusion he could no longer deny. His hand faltered on the laser pointer. He looked smaller somehow, swallowed by the stage. The silence in the room thickened into something cruel. From the panel table, the session chair leaned forward and said, almost gently, "We may need to reassess the foundation of this line of research." The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. What followed was worse. Nothing. Just the dry hum of the projector, the weight of every eye locked on him, and Everett Whitaker, esteemed, decorated, untouchable, frozen in place. He went silent. "You thought that was satisfying?" Oh no. That was just the first crack. What comes next is poetic, surgical, even. Don't blink, because you'll want to witness every second of what I did next. The moment I clicked submit, I knew something irreversible had begun. This time, there was no alias, no anonymity, no encrypted forum tucked away in the shadows of academia. The paper bore my full name, Dr. Liana Voss, and beneath it, in sharp black font, not a single mention of his, not even in the citations. Every equation, every cross-reference, every carefully chosen word had been rebuilt from the ground up, purified of his theft, his narrative, his influence. I wasn't correcting a mistake. I was correcting history. The title itself was both a scalpel and a mirror, a revision of the Whitaker principle and why it never worked. It swept through the scientific community like a storm at sea, unavoidable, disruptive, oddly calm in its precision. No accusations, no emotion, just undeniable truth. And with it came invitations. This time, they spelled my name correctly. A year to the day since he stood basking under stage lights, I was the one behind the podium. The same auditorium, the same oak panel walls. But the energy was different, not inflated by ego, focused, measured, awake. My voice didn't tremble as I walked through the revised framework. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The logic spoke for itself. And when I finished, the applause came like a tidal wave, uncoordinated, unforced, and standing. In the last row, I saw him, hunched into himself. No name tag, no fanfare. No one stopped him in the hallway for photographs or praise. He sat quietly, watching a stage that used to belong to him, now occupied by the very mind he tried to erase. I never looked directly at him. I didn't need to. The projection behind me lit up with the final slide. Just a title. No graphs. No formulas. Just one sentence in bold. A revision of the Whitaker Principle. And why it never worked. And in that silence, thick, triumphant, irrevocable, I didn't gloat. I told the truth. I didn't erase his name, I said softly. He did. Now that justice was served, what was left for me? Was revenge enough? Or could there be something more powerful than taking back your name? Let me show you. It wasn't fame I wanted. It never was. And when the invitations began arriving, fellowships, keynote spots, honorary awards with glossy seals and embossed envelopes, I didn't answer most of them. The one I did accept wasn't from a major university or a global think tank. It was a quiet letter from a private research institute nestled between redwoods and coastal fog, where names mattered less than ideas, and no one had to trade kindness for credibility. There were no marble halls or engraved plaques on the walls, just long, worn tables covered in notebooks, laughter echoing from open lab doors, and the clink of coffee mugs against whiteboards filled with half-born theories. I didn't have an office with a view. I didn't want one. What I had instead was a room that smelled like old books and chalk dust, where students gathered on the floor, barefoot sometimes, spilling ideas faster than they could write them down. They didn't know everything I'd been through. Most of them just knew me as Dr. Voss, the mentor who asked questions no textbook could answer, the one who listened before correcting, who told them, "You don't need permission to be brilliant, just evidence." And for the first time, when I said it, I believed it. There's a rhythm to peace you don't notice when you're chasing survival. I learned to wake up with the sun instead of alarms, to slice apples slowly for my afternoon tea, to read my students' essays not because I had to, but because their curiosity moved me. I'd underline the lines that stumbled, but tried. Those were always my favorite. Not the perfect answers, but the ones that reached, even if they didn't land. Growth lives in the reaching. On Friday evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of oolong, the kind that smelled faintly of peaches and old rain. The vines around the railing had started blooming again, soft blue clematis, curling toward the light. I never planted them. They must have come from a seed that drifted in, unnoticed, until it decided to stay. I liked that idea, that healing could happen without force, just by staying still long enough for something gentle to take root. Sometimes my niece would come visit. She'd bring her sketches, a new one each week. She wasn't a scientist, but she had a way of observing the world that made me feel like one again. Once she showed me a drawing of a bridge made entirely of thread. "It's strong," she said, "because it's made by 1,000 tiny strands, all holding each other." I kept that one above my desk. There were moments, quiet and unassuming, that held more meaning than any public vindication ever could. The laughter of 2 students cracking a problem at midnight, a handwritten thank you note tucked into my mail slot, the sound of rain tapping the roof while I brewed tea for one. I had erased him not by force, but by outliving the shadow he tried to cast. He disappeared from the journals, from the citations, from the symposiums, but more importantly, he disappeared from the part of me that once burned for retribution. And yet, I wasn't bitter. That surprised me more than anything. Justice had come, not as a firestorm, but as a slow, steady clearing. A breath returning to lungs that had been holding too long. I thought revenge would be the thing that saved me. But in the end, it was something simpler, softer. The act of teaching without ego, of loving my field again, of sipping tea beneath blooming vines and realizing I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to them, not to him, not even to myself. This was never about destruction. It was always about reclamation. Reclaiming my voice, my place, my name, and in doing so, I didn't just dismantle a legacy built on lies. I built something truer, quieter, more enduring in its stead. Sometimes, as the sun slips below the trees, I sit there with my teacup, listening to the crickets hum and the pages of student essays rustle in the wind. And I think, Not of the betrayal, not of the courtroom silences or the applause, but of the bridge of thread and the girl who saw strength in what could bend. That's what victory feels like. Not loud, not grand, just whole. You might think the villain's fall was loud and dramatic, but in real life, the most devastating downfalls happen in silence. Watch closely, because his story didn't end when I walked away. It ended when he couldn't escape what was left behind. The silence came first. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that bursts in with screams or slamming doors, but the slow, creeping kind that steals sound from a room until all that's left is the echo of your own breath. That was how it began for Professor Everett Whitaker. A name once spoken in reverent tones now hovered in the air, like a bad smell no one wanted to acknowledge. The institutions that once begged for his keynote presence withdrew their invitations without ceremony. The funding board sent carefully worded notices that read like condolences. His most loyal assistant left a single-page resignation on his mahogany desk. No signature, just absence. The journals followed next. One by one, they retracted his publications, not with fury, but with cold, academic precision. Statements were issued, brief, bloodless, damning. Upon further peer review, the foundational logic presented in Dr. Whitaker's framework is no longer supportable under current standards. The words weren't even bolded, just another quiet erasure in the endless tide of scientific correction. His theories, once required reading, now came marked with red flags. Caution, based on disputed structure. Libraries across the country quietly updated their digital catalogs. Students were advised to skip his chapters. He appealed, of course, drafted long rebuttals drenched in indignation and nostalgia for what had been. But no one answered. His emails went unanswered, phone calls redirected. The world he once ruled with a charismatic smile and a commanding tone no longer bent to his voice. It had learned to live without him. He still came to campus at first, dressed sharp, tie too tight, posture ramrod straight, as if he could will the old hierarchy back into place. But eyes darted. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when he walked by. The new students didn't know who he was, and the ones who did looked away. He sat in the faculty lounge once and heard his name mentioned only in a joke. Not even about the science, just about how he always ordered the most expensive coffee and never tipped the barista. The university didn't fire him. They didn't have to. They just reassigned his office to someone else, quietly, as was now the custom. His new space was smaller, no windows, and the nameplate read simply, Visiting Scholar, a courtesy title, an echo of relevance. On the bookshelf, the spine of his own textbook stared back at him, now bearing a sticker over the title that read, Under Review. At home, things were no better. The house once filled with celebratory banquets and curated wine tastings was now dim and quiet. His wife had stopped attending faculty galas 2 years ago. Now, she didn't speak at all. They passed each other in the hallway like ghosts haunting the same timeline. Once she placed a letter on his nightstand, divorce papers. She didn't ask for anything. She just wanted out. But the worst of it, the cruelest part, was that no one cared enough to hate him anymore. He wasn't controversial. He was irrelevant. A man whose greatest enemy had not been public scandal, but quiet truth. The academic network that once celebrated him had collectively turned the page, and he no longer appeared in footnotes. The students who passed him in the library didn't recognize his face. And those who did, they recognized something else, something colder, a warning. Every so often, he would wander into the university library. The main reading room still had that smell he loved, paper, dust, sunlight. But now, when he searched the digital archive for his name, the screen blinked back. No results found. In its place, under the section where his legacy once lived, a new name had emerged. Hers. Dr. Liana Voss. A rising citation curve. Clean, elegant publications. No hint of scandal, just rigorous brilliance. He would stand there, clutching a borrowed tablet, reading the abstract of her newest paper. It wasn't even about him. It was about systems theory. But the elegance of it, the clarity, it sliced deeper than accusation ever could. He would return the device to the desk without a word, walk past the bookshelf where his own title had been moved to the clearance section, past the hallway where once a portrait of him hung, now replaced by a rotating student art gallery. No fanfare, no vandalism, just absence. He'd walk home in the cold, hands shoved into his coat pockets, wondering how a legacy could vanish so cleanly, wondering if anyone, anywhere, still believed him, if his own voice still mattered outside his head. I never saw him again. I didn't need to. I didn't need an apology or a confrontation or a final word. The world had already spoken, not through drama, through silence, through the quiet rewriting of history. Through every library shelf where his name had faded and mine had quietly taken root. And that, I think, is the truest kind of justice. When you don't have to shout, when you don't even have to witness. Just knowing, deep in your bones, that every time he walks into that library, he sees the name that now stands where his used to be. Mine. So what do you do when your enemy fades, and you finally have the silence you fought for? You build something louder than revenge. Legacy. And I did. One student at a time. They say time heals all wounds. But in my case, it wasn't time. It was truth. Not the kind that shouts or demands, but the quiet kind. The kind that walks with its head high and hands clean. In the months after Professor Whitaker's name faded from textbooks and the echoes of his fall stopped reverberating through the halls of academia, I found myself at a new threshold. One I didn't even know I'd been walking toward. It wasn't a stage or a podium or a flash of vindication. It was a table, a long, simple table where bright-eyed students gathered, their notebooks open, their questions relentless, their trust in science still unbroken. And this time, I was the one standing at the head, not as a cautionary tale or a survivor, but as a mentor in the truest sense of the word. That was when the idea for the organization came. It wasn't born from revenge or grief. It was born from the look in a young woman's eyes when she hesitated to speak up about a lab supervisor who kept taking credit for her work. I recognized that hesitation. I had worn it like a second skin for years. So, I built something, not with code or circuitry or equations this time, but with people, with purpose. We called it Legacy Without Theft, a sanctuary for students and junior researchers whose voices had been stolen, whose names had been erased in footnotes and hidden beneath institutional ego. We provided legal resources, advocacy, mentorship, and above all, visibility. Our motto wasn't long or poetic. It was simple. Truth deserves a name. I didn't start the foundation to be seen. In fact, I rarely spoke at our events unless asked. But when I did speak, when I told my story, it wasn't to garner sympathy. It was to ensure that the next generation understood something I had learned the hard way. Genius can be stolen for a moment, but legacy belongs to truth. I saw the shift in their eyes when I said that, the kind of shift that happens when someone realizes they're not alone. And that was enough. I still publish, not frequently, not obsessively, just when I have something worth saying. My work is no longer about being first or being right. It's about being precise, being honest, being useful. And when one of my papers makes it to press now, it's with a single name on the byline, mine. No co-author who didn't contribute, no senior researcher who oversaw, but never built. Just the clean line of authorship earned the right way. I keep a copy of every published article in a box on the bottom shelf of my bookshelf. I don't frame them. I don't hang them on the wall, but every now and then, when a new one arrives, I'll read it again. Not to admire the words, but to remember the journey that led me back to the page. And when I set it in the box, I smile. Not with pride, but with peace. Friday evenings are my ritual now. Not the rigid kind, but a gentle one. I brew a pot of peppermint tea, open the doors to the garden, and sit on the old wooden bench on my porch. It creaks under me like it remembers the years too. The wind moves slow through the mint leaves I planted last spring, and the light bends softly against the edge of the railing. That's usually when the sun dips low enough to hit the brass plate on the table beside me, the one etched with the title of my most recent article. Just my name, nothing more. Sometimes I think about Everett, not with anger, not even with regret, just as a shadow that once moved across the sun. I don't know where he is now. I don't ask. Some ghosts don't need exorcism. They just need forgetting. And yet, I know that somewhere, in some musty corner of a university archive or a forgotten citation index, his name still flickers. Not as a titan of science, not anymore, but as a footnote to a larger truth, that you can forge papers, forge letters, even forge recognition, but you can't forge legacy. Legacy is what remains when everything else has faded, and the only thing that survives the fading is integrity. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven him, and I always answer the same way. Forgiveness doesn't mean inheritance. You can let go of the anger without handing over the story. Some things are meant to be remembered, not for the harm they caused, but for the strength they revealed. Now, I spend more time planting than publishing, more time listening than lecturing. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more quiet defiance, more gentle courage, more hands reaching back to pull others forward. That's the legacy I want to leave, not one of retribution, but of restoration. So I sit, one foot tucked beneath me, a cup of warm tea in hand, and watch the sunlight fall across the edge of a nameplate I once thought I'd never earn. The one that reads, Dr. Liana Voss. The air smells of mint and ink and late-day sun. And for the first time in a long time, there's nothing left to prove. Only light, only breath, only peace. Thank you for walking this path with me. If my story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, and if stories like this matter to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more.